Hey guys, welcome to my review of the brand new album, Science Fiction. So for those who don't know, Brand New are one of the best emo bands of the past couple decades and one of my personal all-time favourite bands. Across their career they've received massive success and have played arenas all around the world over the last few years especially. They really helped define emo music in the 2000s, especially with their albums Deja Entendu and The Devil and God Are Raging Inside Me. I personally discovered them about 5 or 6 years ago and ever since then have been absolutely obsessed, The Devil and God Are Raging Inside Me being one of my personal favourite albums of all time. And there are songs like Sick Transit Gloria, I Will Play My Game Beneath the Spinlight, The Boy Who Blocked His Own Shot, Jesus Christ and Limousine, which are among my favourite songs of all time. But since the band's previous album Daisy, they haven't really released a lot of new music. They've released 2 singles, which were Mean and I Am a Nightmare, but that was about it, so they hadn't really had another full length in almost 8 years. And a couple years back the band even announced that in 2018 they would be officially breaking up, but before then would release one final album. After being delayed last year, the album was officially announced on August 15th and was set for an October release on a limited edition vinyl. And I think a lot of people were quite up in arms about the fact that the band were kind of charging like ridiculous amounts of money for this vinyl for an album we hadn't heard anything about, didn't have a title, and we'd heard no songs from. However, 2 days after this limited edition vinyl was put on sale, the 500 people that got a chance to pre-order the album actually received a cryptic CD that contained the new album. And a few hours later, completely out of nowhere, the band surprise drops the album officially. Science Fiction is definitely an album that has a lot to take in. They really put everything they possibly could into this new album, and I think it really shows on every single track. And right off the bat, I will say that this album is absolutely fantastic, so I may go on a while because every single song has loads that I can talk about, so I'm going to literally go through the track list and talk about all the songs and why they're so great. A lot of the tracks throughout the album have these recordings of a therapist talking to their patient, because therapy ends up being a huge theme on the album that comes up quite a few times throughout the different tracks. And this is how the first song, Lit Me Up, starts. Lit Me Up is this really synth heavy track that tells you straight from the get-go that this is unlike anything we'd heard from the band prior. On this track, the guitars sound absolutely beautiful and are incredibly effect heavy and sound really distant. The instrumentation of this track just sounds really moody, and I think it's absolutely beautiful. The track is one that focuses heavily on the therapy theme that I talked about earlier, with Jesse singing about bringing repressed trauma back to the surface and having to face it head on. There are also links on this track to fire and water being themes that Jesse sings about quite a lot on the album Daisy. This may be one of the very few tracks that talks about fire compared to the quite a lot of water tracks throughout the album, but it's also one of the first callbacks on the album to previous works, which we'll get to later on because they do it quite a lot on this album. The lyrics on this track are just absolutely beautiful. Jesse sings about his dark side and worries that he can't get into heaven because of the things that he's done, and it just makes the track incredibly emotionally impactful. Unlike previous more moody tracks from albums like The Devil and God, the track doesn't really have this huge big loud moment like you'd expect it to have. It doesn't really build up to anything, it just kind of stays the same throughout the track. But that's honestly not a criticism. I think it sounds beautiful. It's incredibly dark and has a lot of gloomy atmosphere, which creates this song that is incredibly interesting and one that hits you straight in the gut from the get-go. We then get to the second track, Can't Get It Out, which is much more of a straightforward rock song than the previous track. The track has a memorable and catchy riff, and I love the use of feedback throughout the track. It just sounds really great. They take something that is in many ways kind of grating on the ears and they turn it into something that is incredibly musical and adds to the track. And this is actually something that they do quite a lot on the album. They take these sounds that are really like hard to listen to normally on other things, but they make it sound so great and it fits in with the rest of the track so perfectly. On this track, Jesse focuses on the band and their music, and he says that he worries that people listen to their music and think that just incredibly depressing and nothing more. He says that he tries to sing about his darkness and emotions in a way that comes off as a positive message for his listeners, but he can't seem to get it out in the way that he intends to. The track on the surface sounds kind of upbeat and fun, but the lyrical content of the track gives it this whole new light, something that they actually do quite a lot on this album I think really works. This song is then followed by the song Waste, a track which kind of plays out as Jesse having a conversation with his past self and encouraging him to see things will eventually get better if he actually starts to try and recover himself. I love the chorus on this song, it's just absolutely beautiful. It sounds huge and I love the use of strings on it as well. It really elevates the song to a whole new level. This is then followed by Could Never Be Heaven, an almost folky song that is mostly just Jesse with an acoustic guitar. From the track it gets strong Bright Eyes vibes and it just sounds absolutely beautiful. Lyrically it almost seems to be an expansion on the lyric from You Won't Know that is in heaven there's no husbands or wives. He kind of sings about how messed up he is and that there's people he loves that he's lost, but with the person that he loves he feels like he's in heaven, and without her it wouldn't feel like heaven. This song is very simple yet fantastic. It really hits you in the heart when you listen to it and has one of the catchiest choruses on the entire album. We then have Same Logic Teeth, which honestly is my personal favourite track on the entire album. I absolutely adore this track. It's just perfect in every single way. The song gives me goosebumps every time I hear it. It's just perfectly constructed from start to finish. The progression of this track is great. It builds up throughout its 5.5-minute running time. It starts off with this acoustic guitar and atmospheric but beautiful clean guitar riff, which I absolutely adore. But then it builds up and builds up to one of the most explosive and energetic songs on the album. The track kind of shows the band's love for bands like Modest Mouse, and the main riff actually reminds me of the song Little Motel. The chorus is probably, in my opinion, the most catchy and memorable chorus on this album. It's incredibly infectious and has actually been stuck in my head ever since the album's release, along with the chorus for the track No Control, which we'll get to later on in the review. It's lyrically one of the most depressing tracks on the album and focuses on self-harm and the toxic ways that people try and deal with their mental illnesses. And I adore the low-pitched vocals on the second verse singing the line, "At the bottom of the ocean, fish won't judge you by your faults." Easily one of my favourite lyrics on the album. The track starts off soft, but it progresses and becomes this really aggressive and dirty song. The use of distorted guitars, Jesse screaming, and the noisy synth lines help create this song that is rough and grating, but at the same time incredibly euphoric. This song seriously has quickly become one of my favourite brand new songs and easily one of my favourite songs from this year. 137 is very similar musically to Same Logic in the way it starts off incredibly soft and somber but then explodes into this massive, incredibly aggressive track. The track is lyrically one of the most philosophical tracks on the album, with it being about the end of the world being caused by a nuclear war. Jesse sings about how careless the world is now and how everything could just be destroyed so easily. And he also starts to sing about how he's struggling with faith because God doesn't seem to really be doing anything about it and how he's letting them die. The lyrics on the chorus especially are fantastic, and I love the line, "Let's all go play Nagasaki, we can all get vaporized." It's just a fantastic lyric. And there's this really cool acoustic solo before the build-up, which I also love. But my word, when the track explodes and has that electric guitar solo, God, that moment gives me goosebumps every time I hear it. It's one of the most epic and destructive moments on this entire album. The next track, Out of Manner, is one of the very few tracks that kind of sounds like a brand new song would. It's a simple yet fun rock song similar to Can't Get It Out, one that contrasts the songs about death and faith perfectly. The track has some great and incredibly catchy melodies all throughout, and I love the melody in the verse. Jesse's low voice reminds me a little bit of sort of a melody that would be kind of in a 9 Inch Nails verse almost. This is an album that doesn't really have many possible singles on there. However, if there was one that I'd expect to get radio play and be played live frequently, it'd be this song. It's a very exciting song, although honestly one of my least favourites on the album, but with that being said, I still really like this track. In the Water shows the band going into heavy blues rock territories. In fact, the intro to the track actually reminds me heavily of something that you'd hear from sort of an early Led Zeppelin album. And it's a track that brings back the theme of water, something that returns in most of the tracks later on in the album as well. In this track, Jesse seems to kind of be questioning the band and this album in general. He kind of seems to be asking himself whether he's done enough for the fans, whether he's given the fans everything he can, and whether this last album is the perfect goodbye to fans that we've always wanted it to be. This track is just beautiful. I love the guitar solo on it. It's just so fantastic and impeccably played. Also, I love the ending of the song where they throw in 2 callbacks to earlier songs, including the 2 lines from the introduction of the song Daisy and the repeating of 7 years, something that was a very important part of the song Limousine. The callbacks on this album in general are just great. It really helps tie everything together really neatly. Desert is surprisingly one of my favourites on the album, and one that I've actually not seen a lot of people talk about. This track is sung from the perspective of a bigoted American Christian man who is singing about how he hates gay people, essentially. The track is kind of reminiscent of The Archer's Bows Have Broken from The Devil and God, and how he criticises conservative Christian values. Lyrically, I think it's a really great song, and I love the simple instrumentation and melodies. The track almost has kind of a southern rock / country feel to it at times. Plus, I love Jesse's obvious redneck accent that he sings with all throughout. It kind of adds this comedic side to the whole track. Then we get to No Control, which is another track that I could see being a single, and honestly it's probably the weakest track on the album in my opinion, but it's by no means bad. I just don't think it's as great as some of the other tracks are. The track is about someone who is struggling to keep control over himself, and this leads to him feeling unhinged and makes him afraid and feeling guilty of the things that he's done. The melodies are incredibly catchy, but the problem I have with the track is that it doesn't really stand out quite like some of the other tracks on the album do. There's no impressive instrumentation or really gut-wrenching lyrics or anything like that. It just kind of seems to be a pretty simple song, but still one I quite like and find pretty memorable to listen to. 451 kind of carries on the blues rock inspiration seen on In the Water. In fact, it very much feels like a follow-up to that track. The instrumentation on this track is fantastic. It builds up during the track and once again has an incredible guitar solo later on. The chorus is very epic and sounds almost like a chant at times. In fact, the whole song kind of does. It's very pounding and marching. I also really like the key change towards the end of the song when the chorus is repeated. It just sounds really great. And that leads us to the final track in the album, Batter Up, which is probably one of, if not my favourite closing track from a brand new album to date. It's the perfect way to cap off the album, and it's a very beautiful and emotional way to end their final album too. With this track, Jesse kind of brings together a lot of the themes on the album and blends them together into this one track. Lyrically, it's a track about self-loathing and seems to be the narrator giving up on fighting his demons that he's been fighting all throughout the album. It's a song that is honestly one of the most somber and heartbreaking songs on the album. I remember getting a little bit teary-eyed when I first heard it, not just because of how emotional the song actually is, but because this is possibly the last time I'm gonna hear a brand new album for the first time. And everything about this song just ends the album and honestly the band's career off perfectly. The instrumentation is absolutely gorgeous, and that massive section of feedback at the end is incredible. Usually when people use things like a prolonged period of feedback in their songs, it starts to get really boring after a while and seems to go on forever. However, in this track it somehow goes by really quickly, which is impressive considering the fact that this is an 8.5 minute long song. Honestly, I think with science fiction, Brand New have created something that remains captivating, exciting and heartbreaking every time I listen to it. They create this incredibly unique mood, and throughout this album it grips you in and doesn't let you go across its 61-minute running time. And for an album this long to be this captivating and exciting all throughout, it's incredibly impressive. This is an album honestly where I can't listen to one track on its own without wanting to listen to the entire thing start to finish, which is probably why I've listened to it literally every single day since it got released. With this album, the band cement themselves as being one of the best bands in alternative rock, and I honestly think they went from being at the height of emo and pop punk to being an experimental band that could be on par with bands such as Radiohead in my opinion. Each track is perfectly constructed, has some beautiful somber lyrics and some of the best instrumentation I've heard honestly this whole decade. Every song sticks in your head, and it's an album as a whole that I've not stopped thinking about and marveling over since its release. I know some fans will probably be a little bit disappointed that it lacks the energy and aggression of the band's previous records, but seriously, give it a few chances, accept the album that it is, and I think you could get a hell of a lot out of it. I was pretty dead set on my album of the year previously, but this album has come out and now I have to rethink everything because this has become the strongest contender I've heard since the Creeper album earlier in the year. So I'm thrilled to give this brand new album, Science Fiction, a 10 out of 10. This album is just perfect. Listen to it right now if you've not heard it yet. So thanks for watching my review of the brand new album. So I've got some more reviews coming up soon, including a Queens of the Stone Age review, which will hopefully be out sometime next week. I've also got the new In Your Honor review coming out very, very soon, hopefully. But it will definitely be out before the end of the month at least. Hopefully sometime next week, depending on when I get it edited. I've also got some more announcements coming up about later videos, so stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time.